Let's talk about enmeshment again. The reason being so is because I want to paint an understandable contrast. Wow, look at my hair. An understandable contrast between love and enmeshment. Because something that I've learned along my journey of healing that has actually been very, very helpful. It's been just a concept that helps me to understand that the pain that I felt that I thought was from love was actually not from love, and instead enmeshment. Let's look at enmeshment. Let's take a stroll down Minuchin Valley. Salvador Minuchin, the godfather of enmeshment. I believe that he was the person that actually coined the term enmeshment. Enmeshment is when boundaries are diffused, basically meaning that boundaries are blurred in a family system. From what I believe, it doesn't have to be a biological or blood-related family system. It's really more so just a matter of what a person is raised in, right? The type of environment. And then ultimately, a family system is kind of like a puzzle, right? Depending on how you're raised, if you are raised in enmeshment, you're comfortable and familiar with enmeshment. You're comfortable with that dynamic. So therefore, you become conditioned by that, and then you also seek that out later on in other relationships and other, group dynamics, right? But yeah, so it's diffused boundaries. Everyone's shit is everyone's shit. It's pseudo-intimacy. It's, when you think about, like, boundaries, for instance, right? Healthy boundaries are, it's like if you're surrounded by, like, a cell, right? If you have imagine that you're inside of a Pokeball, for instance, right? If you have healthy boundaries, there are holes in that Pokeball, but you feel safe with yourself allowing certain and specific people in, right? They're not these massive holes where people can just reach in and grab you however the fuck they want to, right? They're holes that you allow people in, right? And so enmeshment, there are the massive holes where people can reach in whenever the fuck they want to, and because you don't feel good about yourself, you just allow it all the time, and that's pseudo-intimacy. That's the way that works, right? So I hope that I made enmeshment understandable, right? Enmeshment, again, is diffused boundaries where everyone's shit is everyone's shit. There's oversharing, there's drama, there's gossip, there's lack of healthy boundaries, meaning that people are talking about each other without that person being present. Again, lack of healthy boundaries. I was just remembering that I saw somebody on the comment something saying that I didn't know what enmeshment is. I do. I've read halfway through a book on enmeshment. It's actually by Salvador Minuchin. It's called Psychosomatic Families. And of course I will finish reading that book, but yeah, I'm pretty well versed in enmeshment. Another form of enmeshment is triangulation, from what I understand. Which is when, like, say for instance, if somebody wants me to talk to somebody else, they're going to reach out to me. They're going to be like, hey, can you just have a word with this person? No. For starters. Secondly, if I want to, I will. So don't get in between. Yeah, so let's look at the contrast between love and enmeshment. Specifically for the purposes of helping people understand that the pain that they've felt throughout their entire life that they thought had to do... Because I've heard it said so many times, and I've probably even said it myself. Love is painful. I'm not going to say that it's not, right? I'm not going to sit here and invalidate any of that kind of stuff, because that's just not my place. But what I am going to say is that enmeshment is painful, right? Oh, by the way, let me just also say that enmeshment also has to do with utility of a person, right? Because you feel like you need to be in somebody's life for specific utility. And if you're not there, you feel like you're not a part of their life. And the only way that you can be a part of your life is if you are that utility, right? And that fucking sucks. That's painful, because when you aren't that, you wonder why you're not that, and you wonder what they're doing without you. And that kind of like FOMO just sucks. That fear of missing out really sucks. It really fucks a person up. I've experienced that. Yeah, when you mistake enmeshment for love, I've actually been doing this throughout my entire life. I thought that what it was, and again, it's not that it's not love. It's real. Love happens, but the enmeshment counterpart, I guess I'll say, also happens, right? Enmeshment, again, going back to the whole matter of diffused boundaries, doing exceedingly way too much for a person. No, Chris's responsibility ends right here. What Chris has done for other people has been over the fucking moon and beyond. Again, lack of healthy boundaries. Enmeshment, my utility for another person. What is it that I need to do for another person? Right? And so you can love a person, but you can also be enmeshed with them. And the pain is coming from the enmeshment, because the pain is, maybe them being, I don't know, a lack of presence in your life, but specifically because of that sense of utility. I have based love around my utility in other people, in other people's lives, without realizing that the very reason that I felt so in pain was because I was wondering what that person was doing without me, and wondering, like, if they were able to take care of themselves without me. And it's just not a healthy approach, right? And so, like, that pain of, like, that fear of missing out, like, it's just, it's wild how painful enmeshment can actually be, because, here's one of the biggest parts of it, right? Self-sacrificing. When you're enmeshed with somebody else, you don't have healthy boundaries, yes, but you're also sacrificing what it is that you need for the other person, which is why it's so painful. And let me say this too. This is probably one of the most important aspects of this. I might actually make a part 2 of this, because I realize now there's a lot to say here. From what I've learned, and also what I've experienced, one of the reasons why enmeshment is so painful is because, yes, people are actually comfortable in relationships that are enmeshed, but they're also way too limited. They don't get to actually actualize themselves. Why? Because they make choices that limit their capacities and their capabilities as a fucking individual. Again, because individuality is not allowed in relationships of enmeshment. It's not, because when you think about it, enmeshment has no differentiation between self and other, right? Maybe not entirely, but in many relationships of enmeshment, my boundaries are another person's boundaries. They gain self through my boundaries. That's one of the ways that they actually know who they are, know who and what they are, right? And so, if they don't do something, then I am not allowed to either. It's not that I have a gun pointed at my head, but it's that I'm actually choosing to not do that thing, right? Because it doesn't make them feel comfortable, and because we're enmeshed, then it's just not allowed. It's just not acceptable. And so therefore, I am making that choice, right? And it might not be consciously, right? Because at certain levels of awareness, you would awaken, you would open your eyes and be like, oh, this enmeshment game is just not working out for me because it's limiting myself as a human, as an individual, and I don't want that, right? So at higher levels of conscious awareness, it's probably likely that you would exit that matrix, shout out to Neo, and, just kind of like leave, because why else would you stay there? It wouldn't make sense because it's not beneficial for the individual. Individuality really doesn't exist in enmeshment, because if it did, enmeshment wouldn't exist. They wouldn't exist at the same time. Enmeshment limits an individual, so therefore an individual might want to make a choice, but they don't, because maybe that choice would mean leaving this person behind, this person that they're enmeshed with, and they can't do that. So, like, let me just try to real quickly paint the clear contrast between enmeshment and love here. Love is freeing. Love is without conditions. Love, like, I've always used to hear the word unconditional love, and I'm realizing that it's either love or it's not love. It's not a matter of unconditional, because love is unconditional. And so all of these things go into consideration with love. It's real, it's supported, it's free, it's wonderful, it's without limitations and conditions, right? Enmeshment is the exact opposite of that, right? So love, you wouldn't really feel that pain in, but enmeshment you would, because enmeshment has to do with diffused boundaries. It has to do with your shit is my shit. That's fucking overwhelming. I don't know about you, but that is overwhelming for me. Enmeshment has to do with, I can't actualize myself because I am limited to the confines of what you'll have to say about it, and I care way too much about that, so I'm just not going to, I'm not going to budge on that. Enmeshment is painful because it limits a fucking individual. Enmeshment is painful because a person that is enmeshed usually sees themselves in a sense of utility for the other person or other people, and therefore with that, it's far less about intimacy actually, and far more about how another person could use me or how I could use another person. And don't get me wrong, we get into relationships for specific reasons. Maybe we need people for certain things, of course, right? But enmeshment's an entirely different story. And usually the pain comes from feeling a lack of utility in other people's lives, because it's like, oh, well, they don't need me anymore, so, they've found somebody else, they've moved on. That's really fucking painful. But love is really not about utility. Love is to know and to be known. Love is to see and to be seen. Love is to feel and to be felt. Love is to hear and to be heard, Enmeshment is to be fucking used, and then when you're done being used, you're gone, right? Enmeshment is a lack of boundaries. Fuck, the more I heal and the more I set healthy boundaries with people, the more I realize how much enmeshment has just fucked my life up. It really has. Like, enmeshment seriously sucks. Enmeshment is the painful part of every relationship. Of course, every relationship that has enmeshment, because not every relationship does have enmeshment. Enmeshment is really just like, I take this hand right here, right? Imagine I take my other hand and I interlace my fingers. That's what enmeshment is, right? But healthy relationships are when both people are individuals, right? And they are allowed to think and feel for themselves and form their own opinions and have their own beliefs and ideas about things, and not be, pressured to change. They are allowed to be themselves. And that sense of individuation and differentiation between the two people is very clear. So that's the difference between love and enmeshment and the contrast and everything. And that's why people that are enmeshed experience the pain that they do, and it's not from love, it's from enmeshment. Again, I might make a second video on this because I feel like there's a lot to continue to explore here, but for now, yeah, that's the difference between enmeshment and love.